Randall, how are you?
Very good, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm so excited to chat.
Yeah, likewise.
Should we just get into it?
Whatever you would like, my friend.
All right. So we got some people who are with us. They might be sending in questions, which we'll do at the end. But in the meantime, I'm very excited to talk. So I thought what we'd start with is this idea of your definition of leadership as being a leader is someone who makes people better. Walk me through where that. I imagine it's a very simple thing, but I imagine it took quite a lot of study and experience to come to it. So walk me through your journey to that insight.
So you, as you well know, so many definitions of leadership and so many representations of it. But the more time you spend with leaders and you kind of look at the essence of, instead of looking at the kinds of functions that they serve, or the ways that they do things, which we're certainly interested in, but at the base of it is, I've never been around a leader that in their head, at least, if not in their expressions, doesn't have an idea that they want to make people and situations better. And so if you think of leadership as an expression, not a possession, which is really where we started from, and then you move to the idea of, so where does leadership reside? Well, it resides in actions and behaviors and decisions and messages and choices. Then why are you engaging those things? And when you ask that question, you get you're doing them, you're engaging them to make other people better or situations better. And then if you remove the idea of title, authority, power, status away from leadership, which is really the thing that makes it dark to other people and makes it misunderstood. And you say, okay, so who can lead? Well, anytime I'm making people better or making situations better, I'm making a choice to do so, then I'm choosing to lead. And so a very long time ago, I've decided that I just want to subscribe to the definition of the empowering view of leadership as expression in a way that anybody or everybody can do it and does it on an ongoing basis. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, no, I like that because it makes it much more accessible as well. I remember when I was working on this book with Chris Bosch, who won 2 championships with Miami. He was talking to me about a conversation he had with one of his coaches. It was high school or college. They were saying, look, like the leader is not necessarily the loudest person in the locker room. It's not necessarily the team captain. It's not necessarily the best player on the team. And it's not the person giving exciting speeches at halftime either. There are lots of ways to lead. And so I like that because I think if your definition of is that a leader makes people better, then anyone and everyone inside an organization, inside an industry, inside a community can play a leadership role, whether you're the CEO or the president or the owner.
And isn't that obvious once you say it out loud? I mean,
Sure.
that people are leading all the time. They just don't think of it as leadership. I mean, somebody needs to be comforted and you comfort them. Is it really not an act of leadership? Well, of course it is. Now, it doesn't mean it's skillful, doesn't mean it works, doesn't mean it's effective, but the attempt is to try to make a situation or a person better. And as a result, you're leading, which means we can make that choice more often if we so choose.
Well, and that there are different that an organization is filled with leaders at different levels, and that different leaders have different jobs, but their job is to make either the few people around them or the many hundreds or thousands of people beneath them better. And also that I guess leadership can go both directions. You can make the people above you better and the people beneath you better.
Right, just by your choices, right? Just by the actions and choices you make. And what else is cool about that is that when you have that frame in your head, not only does that mean that you can lead more actively all the time, but it also means now that you can understand what it means to be skillful. Because the idea is, right, if you're going to create leadership excellence, you actually have to get good at making people and situations better by your choices, which means your choices, your behaviors, they actually matter.
Well, I think that connects with the few times that I've seen you at work at some of the leadership offsites that you've had me come speak at. It was interesting. Obviously, you work a lot in finance and with hedge funds and investors. As I've met the people that run or own the funds that you hire you as a coach, I don't know, I guess as an outsider, I assume like the head of some large hedge fund is making a lot of investment decisions, right? Is the sort of the captain of the ship, but actually seeing them at work with you, it's like, oh, they're actually not really doing much of that day to day. Primarily their job is helping the people in the organization do all those things. That primarily the leader is sort of a shepherd and a cultivator of talent and culture, and that's how they make people better. And then those people actually run the business itself.
Amen. Agreed. Right. I mean, that's exactly what happens. And it's true of in any organization of any size in any industry. The best leaders are facilitative in terms of the team, and they're trying to forge a team of leaders, not just themselves being in a position of power and authority. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some weak leaders out there that have some bad things in their head that try to do the opposite. And a lot of leaders, by the way, very good ones, have a high need for control. But at the same point, when you finally get to evolve to a point where you actually understand what leadership is, you're absolutely more about other people than you are about yourself, and you're about the development of everything, and you take a back seat. I think it was Bob Dylan said, when you're on the bottom, when you're on the top, you're really on the bottom. That's exactly how the best leaders say it. They're on the top, but they're really on the bottom. They're a resource to everybody. Now, and being a resource doesn't mean you're a servant. Like I don't rail against servant leadership. I'm not somebody that really bandies about or concerns myself with many definitions, but I do believe that as a great leader, you do need to be a resource, but that doesn't mean that you're only there to serve other people. It means that you're there to collectively facilitate people toward the goals of the organization and toward their own goals. And sometimes that'll look like servant leadership, and sometimes it won't.
Yeah, there's a great book. It's a new translation of Plutarch called How to Be a Leader. And he has a good line. He says, a leader must be able and willing to do anything, but can't do everything. And so I think a servant leader might find themselves in a position where they're just doing everything for everyone and thus not actually serving anyone or the business. So you have to be willing to help anyone with any problem, but you can't be doing everything, because then you're not helping everyone.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, selflessness is a wonderful virtue, but it probably doesn't play out exactly that way in leadership situations. And
yes.
You could be selfless to a point of being highly ineffective. So
this idea of being, leaders come in many forms. I'm fascinated with your career because I've met so many people who swear by you, who've worked with you, who sort of consider you like their sort of secret weapon. But the vast majority of people haven't heard of you. How have you sort of gravitated towards and relished in the role of being the guy behind the guy, or the guy behind the woman? And I know you have many coaches who work for you, so you also have many women who work for you. So they're the woman behind the guy or the woman behind the woman. Talk to me about this sort of less prominent form of leadership. Again, we tend to think of leaders as being leading the charge, but not every leader is well known. Often leaders can be people you've never heard of.
The very best leaders I've ever been around are people you would never even imagine, you never heard of, you never will hear of them. And now they're very well known in their organizations, by the way, and sometimes in their industries, but they either sit in seats that don't require profile, or they actually eschew profile, which is very common of people of excellence in just about everything. I mean, again, if you're trying to put your face on a coin, that's a very different goal than it is to just simply trying to be a great leader. I've always believed that the whole point of us is to be in the background, not in the foreground, that our clients want that. Very, very few people want to say, like, you don't promote like who your doctor is and what your visit was about. You don't normally talk about who your lawyers are. And so why would you talk about who your advisors are? And then I've also had a belief that, if truly leadership is about other people, which is what I deeply believe, it's about how you engage other people. It's not about you. Even your office can't be about you. Even your personal spaces are not about you. They're not in an ideal form. Then how would we not be charlatans if, in fact, we made it about us? as a way of coaching other people to greatness or to excellence. And so I've always had the rule in our firm that nobody gets quoted, nobody writes things, nobody does speeches, nobody does any of those things, that our great work will be referred, from place to place. And we build a beautiful business over a long period of time, totally by referral. We don't market ourselves. We don't do anything other than build relationships and maintain contact with people. We don't advertise. There's none of those things. And yet here we are, in a very esteemed position. And the people that should know us, but the fact that we have lots of journalists and people like that don't know us, I actually find that to be a badge of honor. And so it's just about living consistently with what you're trying to teach. Like
I think it was Truman who said you'd be amazed at what you could accomplish if you don't care about credit. And I think the fact that it's called the Marshall Plan and not the Truman Plan is sort of proof of concept there. But I imagine that because you are okay not getting credit and you don't advertise, it also allows people to hire you and bring you in because they're less threatened by it. And because, in a finely tuned industry where people are always looking for the slightest, sort of sign of where things are going, you wouldn't want to be seen as, oh, they're hiring Randall because things are really bad over at the fund, right? You don't want to be high profile. It would actually impede your ability to effectively lead and make people better.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And it's just a view. It doesn't make it the right view, but it's a view that I hold very strongly, which is it needs to be about the work itself and about other people and about our ability to facilitate. And it isn't about us. I mean, we want to do great work, but none of that great work requires our profile, and it certainly doesn't require our vanity. And so I insist on that, and some people will fight me on it for a period of time, and then they come around to the wisdom of it over time. I'm a big believer in what I call predator theory, right? A fun, make believe theory, which is all the big predators on the planet, lions, tigers, sharks, alligators, like they none of them announce themselves. All of them eat really well because they're stealthy. I think you're supposed to be stealthy when you're in the background, right?
No, that's beautifully said. So this idea of hiring a coach, and again, I think it's sports, it's obvious. Maybe a little bit in business, it's become more well known, but I do feel like, and I know I have this. There's this, people kind of have this resistance towards bringing in a coach. But if the idea of becoming a student of leadership is what you're committing to, it seems like it would make sense that you would bring in an expert, that you would bring in an outside person who could see you from a little bit of distance. I guess it's like the average CEO, especially if they're the founder of the CEO, this is their first time at doing this, or maybe they've worked at one or two other companies. By bringing in someone like you or bringing in a coach, what you're really benefiting from is a swath of experience from other businesses. Like you've worked with hundreds or thousands of CEOs and firms. So if I were to bring you in, what I'm really getting is the trial and error, the failures and mistakes of all those other businesses, which is also a reason to read. But I think directly working with someone who's an expert in a topic, walk me through why people should do that. And also, I've got to imagine still, even at the level you're at, you experience a lot of people whose ego won't allow them to even think of doing something like that.
Well, it's the fortunate thing is I don't get a chance to talk to those people because I never get to them, right?
Yes.
But we got plenty of people to get to, so that's not the issue. So listen, it's one of the reasons that I consider myself as much a coach as an advisor, because I'm a sounding board.
Yeah.
And so, so I've been lots of places, seen lots of things. I mean, even if at a CEO level, and I coach lots of different CEOs, groom CEOs away from financial services in particular. And even if they've been a CEO 3 times, they have an N of 3. They've had 3 experiences. Well, I've had an N of 500, 600. And so don't you want to hear, like, I've seen that situation 25 times. I know some things that you shouldn't do, some things you might think about doing. I have at least a vested interest in knowing some best practices. And so, and by the way, I'm not going to, it's just a recommendation. It's just right. But why wouldn't you want to engage that? In the video analogy, why don't you want to go to, door 17? Why do you want to be killed and waste all that time through all those, trials and tribulations when I can already take you to door 17, take you right there, right? And we can start the game from there. So, smart people go, first of all, every single thing that people are excellent at has sets of routines. Leadership has the same thing. It has a set of routines and behaviors associated with it of true excellence, most of which aren't known. Why wouldn't you want to talk to someone if, in fact, you felt they had some insight into that? And most people are not trained. They're not trained to work with boards. They're not trained to run teams of teams. They're not trained to push a strategic message down an organization. I mean, where do you go for that? And so they want a sounding board. They want advice and best practice. And then they also want some feedback, and they want somebody who's honest, that doesn't work for them in a direct way, that holds up a mirror and says, this is what you're doing. This is who you are. This is what's happening right now. And by the way, the more senior you get in every organization, the more filtered all the truth is that comes to you. And so you need somebody out there telling you the truth, who's willing to say, guess what? You can fire me tomorrow and I'm willing to walk away because I have lots of clients, but I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, and whether you like it or not. I don't want to be unpalatable. I don't want to be offensive, but I'm going to do it. And that's my role. That's the role. And so when you have somebody that's a confidential resource that really knows how to do this stuff, there's nothing like it. There's nothing, there's nothing that equals it. Any more than, no surgeon can operate on themselves. No leader can really assess themselves and understand everything that's going on without some help. That we're the help, we're the resource. That's all.
So I have some scenarios I want to run through with you, but something you just touched on that I've heard you talk about at some of those offsites. Obviously feedback is essential, and we don't get enough unvarnished feedback, but it seems like there's this trend, and I know you have strong thoughts about it, this idea of radical honesty. I've seen you push back on some CEOs who want to go, either they want to go to radical honesty, or radical candor, either because they're coming at it from a good place, or conversely, they just want an excuse to be an asshole. So walk me through how one gives feedback that is honest and authentic, but isn't rude and offensive, because this is a critical part of leadership.
Well, yeah, and isn't that the goal, right?
Yeah.
So I want candidness, of course, but let's separate the idea of uncensored honesty for a second. Nobody wants to be around uncensored honesty, because uncensored honesty is insult, right? It's total challenge. It's offensive. In the worst way. I mean, imagine you woke up to somebody that you're committed to for the rest of your life, and the first thing they did is look at you and went, wow, you really look bad, and your breath stinks, and
yeah,
and like what's in your eye, and like it, and I mean, oh my goodness gracious, probably, by the way, they're probably thinking those things, but they're smart enough to hold the relationship in enough reverence not to do that stuff. Nobody wants to be around uncensored honesty. But now the next point is, we want honesty from people. We want to know what they really think and what their real views are around things that matter to us. And so the question is, how do you express that? And by the way, most of these leaders that say they want radical transparency or, radical candidness and so forth, they want it from other people. They want other people to do it. They don't want it themselves. I mean, they would be very hard taken by any of that candidness. They would sting to the point where they would go, okay, whatever this is, I don't want any of it. So the question then is, how do you produce as much candidness, as much openness, and as much frankness as you possibly can? And it's all about how you carry feedback. And when you study the best leaders, you learn that there's a variety of behaviors and routines by which they carry feedback in a way that doesn't sting and that's very, very honest. And it's about teaching people how to do some of those things. And in the process of that, making them more skillful so that they actually reward honesty and then encourage it and then give it. And so,
yeah, and I found too that feedback it's not just that it has to be constructive, it has to be concrete. I was talking to a friend a few years ago who was asking for some feedback, and I said, look, you're a very Socratic person. You're always asking questions, poking, like, hey, why is it this way? Hey, is that really the best way? I said, it's very provocative, and interesting. But I was like, you have to remember they killed Socrates, right? Nobody just wants someone coming around poking holes at things, pointing out how things are not as good as they could be. My publisher will do this sometimes. They'll go, yeah, it's good, but don't you think there's something better we could do? And it's like, yeah, sure. If I knew what that was, I'd probably have done it, right? So I have to imagine that as an advisor and a coach and as a leader, you also have to find this. It's easy to find fault, but how do you find solutions that go along with the fault that you found? That's how you build a productive collaborative relationship as a leader.
Absolutely. Fault without solution, by the way, is complaint.
Yes.
No, it's not even feedback. It's just a complaint. And by the way, nothing drives me wilder than people that complain but don't have any intention of doing anything about it, right? They just want to complain. Catharsis, like I don't have time for catharsis. I have time to do things about things, but think about this: the very nature of feedback is a direction, and it comes from a place of power. That's why we call it feedback, by the way. Because there's other words we can bandy about, and they have less power associated with them. So, for example, the word advice. It also comes from a place of expertise, but we're often thought that we can accept or reject advice, where feedback is directionally from someone who holds a legitimate role or power or authority, right? A coach to a player, a teacher to a student, a parent to a child, a team leader to a team member, right? So when the very nature of using the word feedback suggests this is a directive action that I'm doing, hopefully with good intentions to improve your performance, but I'm kind of like, I don't want to couch it this way, but I'm kind of not asking you. I'm kind of telling you. I might even show you, but I'm telling you that directively, this is something you need to do. And it's coming from a place of my experience, expertise, but it's also coming from a place of power. Well, how about if I offer it as advice? How about if I say, hey, this has just been my wise counsel, and this is something I was thinking, and I'd offer you this advice. All of a sudden, people are less reactive to that. Well, let's take it even further, right? Let's just say we're going to offer a suggestion, not even a recommendation, because a recommendation is more advice, just a suggestion. I have a suggestion. Notice most people don't go like, oh, well, like that feels terrible. Okay. Right. Now, why do leaders not offer more suggestions? Well, because they want things to happen more quickly. They want things to happen from a directional standpoint of like, I want you to own this. But more importantly, they like the power. They like to feel powerful, and so they want to be right. And so suggestion means maybe I'm not right. Well, gosh, feedback says I already know what the right answer is, and I'm just telling you, I'm carrying that information to you. So even the very nature of how you couch what you say is either going to create more resistance or more acceptance, just in the very, very descriptor of the words. I mean, then I haven't even told you anything important yet. I'm just saying. So whether I say, hey, I've got some feedback for you. Right. By the way, as soon as somebody says that, it's directive.
And it's probably bad. The feedback's not, you're doing a great job.
Probably. Yeah. Versus I have some advice for you, versus I have a suggestion. And then I can go even further than that. I mean, one of the coolest behaviors that we have found is how the best leaders ask for help as a way of carrying feedback. So instead of saying to you, like, you talk up too much at team meetings, like you dominate team meetings and other people are intimidated as a result. They don't take the risk because they know you're going to take the risks and so forth. So the team meetings aren't going the way they want because of you, right? That's my view. It might be right, might be wrong, but that's my view. I can say, can I give you a little feedback? Right. I mean, like you need.
This is you as Randall,
I can give you like, or the leader, right? I can give you a little feedback. Let me give you some feedback that you're talking up too much, and this is what you need to do differently, in the future. Or I can say, can I give you a little advice? Or I can say, can I make a suggestion that when you do this, this is what happens. And so my suggestion is you do a little less of that. Or I can say, hey, I'm trying to build a team, as I think you are with me, that everybody wants to participate and everybody wants to be heard, but more importantly, they're willing to take the risks. And so I need your help. Okay. I need your help to get this done. And one of the things, can you help me by encouraging other people to speak up? And person says, well, of course I can. And you say, well, what do you think gets us there? Well, how do you think you can encourage them? I know how I can encourage them. Well, maybe I can ask them questions. I go, that's good. That's good. And, maybe one thing you could do to help me is maybe you can wait for their answers and not reply for them, because I think you do that sometimes. I think I do that sometimes. Would you be willing to help me that way? Of course. And by the way, I just carry tremendous amounts of feedback. but it has no resistance to it at all because I've actually put myself in the supplicative role of
Sure.
no power at all. The least powerful thing I can do is ask you for help. And so how you carry feedback is everything. And there's lots of ways to carry it, most of which we're not taught to do.
So as I saw this in the questions, so this is kind of a common scenario. Let's say you get to the place where you've couched the feedback in the supplicant role. You're asking for help. What do you do when someone is not acting on the feedback or the advice? How does a leader respond in your experience? What does a great leader do when they're having trouble getting people to act on the changes or suggestions?
Well, it's a great question, but I could answer it in so many different ways because some of it depends on why I think that resistance is coming. Is it because
Sure.
I'm not credible? Is it because they don't like my advice? Am I not practical enough? Not specific enough? Is it because they just don't like, they want to control and they want their own autonomy? I mean, there's so many answers.
Sure.
But my generic answer to that question, which is probably not so generic, is the first thing when I know that people aren't listening is I know that the one thing they'll respond to is data. So right
Sure.
now, this is just about me and you. But if I can make it about more people, so I can actually collect or create some data for you. So, and by the way, I don't have to do it for you. Maybe I'll ask you to do it. And I say, hey, I'd like you to talk to, the three colleagues and ask them, what do they most appreciate about what's happening in the meetings and what do they least appreciate what's happening in meetings? I want you to go collect that data.
Sure.
I can do that, right?
Right.
Or I can say, hey, I've talked to everyone. And by the way, Bob says this and Jill says that and Jackie says this and right. And Sharon says this. And and I would concur, right? So data matters to people. And so
show, don't tell.
When 16 people say you look like a duck, trust me, you look like a duck, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing. Second thing though is if people aren't listening, there might very well be because they're defensive in some way. And so what I want to do is I want to make this about our relationship. Tell me, like, let's explore. Like I've asked you to do this thing, and and I think it would better you, and you're continually not doing this, and you're not being as effective. Let's explore why, and I'm going to make this about me. What can I do? Like what haven't I? Maybe I've not been clear. I'm going to make this about me instead of you because that's how I'm going to reduce your resistance. And so let's make it about me first. And so, like, what resource do you need? What explanation do you need? Like, what help do you need? Do you need me to come do this thing with you? Do you need a tutor for your homework? Like, you're not listening to me. So what do you need from me? I'm going to make this about me. And what that's going to do is create some real honesty around, what's really going on here and in a non-defensive way. So many leaders, that's the last thing they would ever do is make it about themselves because it's the idea, like you're the one not doing it, right?
Right.
But the deal is, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And being effective means what leaders have to do, and we're now right full circle back to this idea of making other people better and not being about yourself. You got to make it about you first, right? And so you're not doing so. I must have misled you. I haven't been clear. And what do you need from me? Okay. Now let's just say that doesn't work still. I love the idea of simply asking you to be in my shoes. So listen, Brian, okay, I've told you X, Y, and Z like multiple times, okay? You clearly haven't acted on it. We've had conversations about that and so on and so on. So now you're me. What would you tell you?
Right.
Like
I like that a lot.
roles.
Sure.
Like, let's change roles. Right. And that's an interesting way of playing it. Or I might say instead, right, I have somebody else that isn't responding to feedback. I've given them this feedback where else. What would you say to them? Okay, because I'm talking about you, but what would you tell somebody else? Okay, and now all of a sudden that opens up a conversation because what I'm trying to do in each of these cases is I'm trying to open the dialogue and create a relational, supportive way by which we can explore what's going on here. Because I don't know what's going on here. I just know that you're not doing what I need you to do.
What I
so
think all
that's my
those
job.
have, what I think all those have in common, which is a really key Stoic virtue, I would say is restraint. The leader has power in the scenarios that you're talking about. They can fire the person, they can yell at the person, they can reassign the job, they can just force the thing to happen. But in all the scenarios you've described, the leader it's not that they're abdicating the power, but they're restraining from using the power and instead trying to get the other person to do the thing under their own power. And I think Eisenhower said that his definition of leadership was to get someone to do something because they want to do it. And that strikes me as maybe the root of your philosophy there.
Or at least within the context of the relationship. But one thing you're going to learn this one day, because you'll have a teenager one day. Pretty soon you're going to realize you're going to give up power to keep power. You got to give up power to maintain power. Just like you have to give respect to get respect, give trust to gain trust, right? Power is a really interesting thing that if you hold it too closely, you actually have less of it. And if you act too powerfully, the only thing that works is to act more powerfully next time.
Yes.
And so it's a very elusively, misunderstood thing that I just find, and again, it takes real maturity, but all it really takes for all of us is to have a teenager, and then you'll solve it, you'll figure it out, or you'll drown in the process. But at some point you realize I can't force my child without being arrested to get on that bus. It has to be his or her idea. And if I haven't instilled those values, and if they look at me and go, I'm not getting on the bus, like I don't have a lot I can do actually, right at the moment to get them on that bus. I can't physically put my hands on them. Otherwise,
Sure.
the police will be coming for me. So now I've chosen, right. For whatever reason, I've created a situation where I haven't given them up enough power in order to maintain my authority and power. And that happens all the time. And the best leaders, the people that are wise, realize this isn't about me in control or me directing things. This is about me making it your idea and creating a context for a relationship where we trust each other, we respect each other, and you'll do this for me because I would do it for you. And that changes everything, right? But so many of us just aren't patient enough or mature enough to do that.
Yeah, I found at American Apparel when Dove sort of had set up this culture of if you screwed up, you got yelled at, but there was never anything beyond getting yelled at, right? So what you found is that incompetent people, it filtered for incompetent people who were okay being yelled at. They basically realized if I can just endure this beating, essentially, that will be the end of this. There'll be no other consequences, no other changes, no other adjustments. So if I can just be like, okay being yelled at, that the storm will pass, and then I can just go back to being whoever I want to be.
So sad, because imagine the amount of disrespect that people have for themselves for being willing to be yelled at, right?
Yes.
So they wake up every morning, look in the mirror and go, not only am I going to get yelled at, but I'm the kind of person that is willing to be yelled at. Okay.
Right. It's a feedback loop.
It creates tremendous helplessness, creates tremendous apathy, right? Talk about commitment, dedication, right? To a cause or to a purpose. That's the recipe for how you don't create it. So again, there's so much stuff for you and I to talk about, but that's just so fascinating because so many leaders move to the expedient and what seems like to be the most effective thing to do, like coercion, like punishment, like threat. I mean, it's such a simple thing to do. And by the way, the reason it's so seductive is because it works. But the problem is that, by the way, if once you move that way, you've now destroyed the relationship and have hurt and harmed the trust enough where the only thing that will work is more coercion.
Right.
And so now you're stuck, you're in a cycle. And here's what we know, not me personally, but in the literature, if you're going to be a coercive leader, you're going to threaten and yell at people, whatever your version of coercion is, you got to be physically present. Otherwise they thumb their nose at you.
Right.
So if you're going to be a parent that's coercive, you got to be in the house, because the moment you go on vacation, these kids are going to destroy things, right? They don't hold the values at all because they're just trying not to get the punishment. Same thing's true in organizations. If you're not physically in the office, people are going to do everything in their power to exert their own control and autonomy and prove to people that you don't control them because you're not there to yell at them. So they will do terrible things. So you have the opposite. So if you're going to be coercive, you got to be really good at it. It's going to happen all the time, and you got to be physically present. Sounds like a horrible leadership life to me.
Yes.
But I'll leave that to other people.
No, you get in a feedback loop, and I've gotten in that myself, where the person is in a job they can't do. You're unable to reach and change them, and so you get in this like almost abusive feedback loop where they're not doing what they're supposed to do. You're yelling at them. They don't care because you're yelling at them. Someone posted in the thing that cliche, the beatings will continue until morale improves. There are also just situations where it's like, this is not a fit. and we're going to be happier if we part ways.
Yeah, but your notion of self-selection is exactly right. I mean, I've had multiple organizations where I've sat down and said, let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this organization. Let's start with the idea that everybody self-selects for the behavior that happens here.
Sure.
And so your reputation is widely known, and your interviewing process is transparent enough where people go, okay, I got to be this kind of person to work here, otherwise, like, this is going to work. And so you lose top talent as a result. But people are blind to that for the most part.
So you talked about this idea of giving up power to keep power. One of the ways I've seen you do this, you've talked about it. Maybe it doesn't seem like giving up power, but it is I think so often people think the leader is in charge. It's all about the leader. The leader's the main person. That's who we're all behind. But you've talked about this idea that a leader is a fan, that you want to be what was it? You wanted to be a great fan or an unconditional fan. Walk me through your sort of, it's not quite cheerleading, but talk to me about how a leader is a fan and supports the people who work for them. I found this really interesting.
So that's really the magic or the foundation of inspiration and motivation, right? I mean, people get inspired or motivated by lots of things, but the one thing that everyone wants more than anything else is the people that they respect and admired rooting for them, cheering for them, clapping for them, right? Wanting them to succeed. What it means to be a fan is, I will do anything for you to succeed, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to hold you accountable. Our relationship has nothing to do with your performance, but I am here to help you succeed, and I want you to succeed, and I'm going to do everything in my power to do so. I'm not going to put up hurdles. I'm not going to, create a gauntlet for you. I am going to simply root for you, and I'm going to demonstrate. Me saying I'm your fan means nothing, but I'm going to demonstrate to you that I am in your corner, and I am trying my best to help you succeed in every way you want to succeed. And when you have that in your corner, it's wind at your back, and you'll do anything for people that are great fans of yours. And we all want parents and coaches and teachers that are great fans, and many of them aren't. Unfortunately, they just don't have that in their head. In fact, they think it's about demand and challenge and a lot of other things, of which there's places for those things. But at the end of the day, the composite of you, are you rooting for me? Are you my fan? Or less so, and my ability to stay committed and loyal to you and reciprocate that support is a function of how you demonstrate it to me.
Yeah, we told a story in the Daily Dad email a few months ago about Jim Valvano, the basketball coach. His father, Valvano, as a kid, had said to his father, "I think I want to be a basketball coach. That's what I want to do." And so the dad says, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great." And they thought he thought it was the end of the conversation. The next day, Valvano's father calls him into his bedroom, and there's a suitcase packed on the bed. And Jim says, "What's that?" And his dad says, "That's my suitcase. It's packed and ready to go for when you coach in the Final Four." And I can it gives me goosebumps to think about that, to think about what that must have meant to a kid. Right? That your dad would do a demonstration so clean and simple and earnest that, like, I'm in your corner and I want to help you be successful. It's just a beautiful thing.
Beautiful is exactly the right word. It is beautiful, right? And when you have that and you experience that level of fanness and you want to do it for other people, and by the way, that's your job as a leader. And if you can't be my fan, you should not be leading me.
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, if you can't be my fan and I'm your child, right, or I'm your spouse, you shouldn't have gotten in this contract with me.
Sure.
Right. And so that's your job. And good days and bad days. Now, most of us can be fans when things are going well.
Right.
Good grades come home, when the marriage is, wonderful and so forth, when the team is performing. The question is, your job is to be and show fanness, right, independent of good or bad outcomes. Right. Your job is to be that fan, because that's what leadership, in some aspect, not all of leadership, but some aspect of leadership, called motivation, inspiration. That's what requires. And the more that you can develop the behaviors and the routines of fanness, of which we know like 48 of them that we've been able to uncover, then the more you'll be able to demonstrate that to people and create and motivate and inspire people without having to know exactly whether they're coin operated or whether they like, to be threatened, or whether they really like autonomy, or they want mastery, or they want purpose, they want higher. Like, I like all those things, but I want a universal. where I know that I'm going to show up anytime, any day with anybody, and I'm going to be more inspirational and motivational. And I know it's fairness. That if I can
So
demonstrate fairness, that's what it gets produced.
here's a situation I saw someone mention, but I've struggled with it myself. What do you do? I found myself, especially with some young people that I've hired, I found myself saying these words like, I can't want this for you more than you want it for yourself. So what do you do when you are a fan of someone, you do want them to be successful, you are rooting for them, but they seem to be stuck in some sort of trap of self-doubt or fear or laziness or entitlement? What do you do when, how do you get people to rise to their level of potential or excellence?
So you shake them up, but shaking them up isn't necessarily a negative, right? There's lots of ways of shaking people up. Like sometimes it's about putting them in the right context so that they're able to succeed at a higher level. Like, for example, you probably know this, but I work with lots of college golf teams. And one of the things I like to do is I like to take the teams a couple of weeks before they, have a big tournament. I like to put them on a course that everybody's going to shoot 63 on.
Yeah.
Like the whole short course, it's easy course, and they're all going to just shoot this really low number. Okay. And they go like, wow, like that felt really good. Damn right. Okay. And by the way, it's not going to be like that in a couple of weeks. So that's the last time we're going to do that. But I want to pump you up. I want to shake you up. I want to get your confidence as high as I can get it, as an example. Or it might be that I just need to put you in a situation where you can demonstrate your skills, and your skills will be more rewarded, not just by me, but by other people. You'll be able to compete in a different way. Or I mean, there's so many ways that I would probably try to shake somebody up. It would depend on that context. But at the end of the day, that's what's going to be in my head. I just want to just to give you superlatives and try. I want to shake you up. I want to create a context by which you can come to see yourself differently, or at least see yourself more like I see you, which is very capable. I'll tell you this, give you an example. I have a very talented person in our team, and for whatever reason, she goes in and out of confidence. And I've tried lots of different things. Well, I had a very honest conversation with her about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she was shocked by it, by the way. And I'll tell you how it ended up. But what I said to her, I took a chance, and I said, I feel insulted by you. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I have all this confidence in you, more than you have confidence in yourself. But what you're telling me when you lack confidence in yourself is that I must be stupid,
Right.
that my confidence is unfounded, that I must not be a good judge. And I find that insulting. She said, it never occurred to me that you could be insulted by my lack of low confidence. And I go, I think the world of you and have invested a tremendous amount of resource. And here you are undermining yourself, and you're basically calling me stupid. And she said, seriously? And I said, not completely, but mostly.
Yeah.
And I said, you got to stop it. And believe it or not, that was the thing that shook her up. And now she goes, listen, if Randall thinks that highly of me, I better start getting on the train. I better think that highly of me, because if I don't, I'm basically not believing in him. And I believe definitely in him. And by the way, I like that conversation a lot, because it made me feel good, right? But at the end of the day, you got to shake people up, because you can't let them stay in this place where they are underperforming based on what they're capable of, because they simply lack a view or a perspective or a context by which they can assess themselves more objectively.
Well, and to go to the conversation you just mentioned, that's another example of giving up power. You're not saying, I'm the leader, I'm the boss, you need to change how you think. You're actually flipping it on its head, and you're saying, you have power over me because I feel insecure or doubtful, insulted by how you're choosing to see yourself. And it's forcing them into the position of going, oh, I have to step up, be confident, believe in myself, so I can be there for Randall.
Exactly right. Sneaky, isn't it?
Yes.
And by the way, all great leadership is sneaky. And I don't mean sneaky in a manipulative, deceptive way. Sneaky in the sense of its subtleties, its nuance. And the nuance that you and I are sharing, there's lots of other nuances, but one of them is giving up power. You got to give up power to be powerful. Just like, if you hold a ball really, really tight, you won't have control over the ball. The tighter you control, you have a grip on that ball, the less control you have over that ball. The same thing's true in human behavior. The tighter you hold things, the less control, the less influence, and the less effectiveness you're going to have in that situation. which is
Although
just counterintuitive.
I saw someone mention this, so I'm glad you brought it up. What is the line distinction balance between sneaky and manipulative? Because there are other leaders who, that they're sort of playing this game, or they're trying to pit people against each other, or trying to sneak this, or like, how does one sort of do the jujitsu that you're talking about without that bleeding over into a kind of manipulativeness or Machiavellianism or what have you?
Positive intentions. Where are your intentions? At the end of the day, I can't judge you for anything other than that. I can't judge only the outcomes, because those happen. Those are moderated by other things,
sure,
right? And I can't judge perfectly your character, generally speaking, because that may not apply in this moment. What I can do is say, from what you've demonstrated, what you said, what you did, and by asking you, what were your intentions, and how positive were they, and how much were they about you, or how much were they about me? And were those intentions pro-social? Were they things where you actually thought that would help? Or was this about you, right, getting your way? Because when you're manipulative and deceptive and sneaky in the negative way, it's because it's about you getting your way. Okay. When you're clever and industrious and creative and sneaky in a positive way, you're being intentional in a positive way to other people. So it's all about intentions for me.
So this idea of being a student of leadership, obviously you've had now 4 decades of actually being in the room where things are happening. Are there any leaders you think people should study or know about, perhaps ones that they don't know? And what would be some books you might recommend to aspiring or struggling leaders?
So I don't even know how to take that question, because I hold the opposite view. I don't want anybody holding up leaders to study or emulate. And the reason is, and I want to correct that in a second, but the reason is this: we make heroes out of people and they disappoint us, right? They're never as good or as flawless as we'd like to make them. They're always going to get us in trouble, and they're always going to do things because they're human. We're all flawed. So it's time for us to stop celebrating people and celebrate actions and behaviors instead. I'm not a big fan of Steve Jobs for what I know and how I know and so forth and so on. But he's got a couple of behaviors that I teach everybody.
Sure.
And I don't have to tell them they're from Steve Jobs. I never tell anybody anything where they come from, because it's irrelevant where they come from. We should hold up the actions of great leaders, the judgments of great leaders. So let me tell you this, for example. Imagine that we started a dialogue together, and it's something where we expect that we haven't found common ground before. This is going to be a difficult conversation, and the like. But I want to have an open, honest conversation. And imagine I say to you, okay, I want to commit to you right now that I acknowledge that I could be entirely wrong about how I see things. I just want to start there, and I'd love for you to reciprocate. I'm not going to require it, but I want to start with this place that says, I acknowledge that I might be totally wrong, and I'm doing so publicly in front of you or in front of this team. Okay. Now let's have a conversation from there. What impact do you think that has on the openness or the transparency of that conversation? I think it has a lot.
It's very disarming.
I think it's a very wonderful thing to do, especially in high conflict situations where people are more likely to dig in and be big advocates for what they believe and don't believe there's anybody else. But when you start there, again, about you, right? Well, guess what? You know where I learned that from? One of the few things I learned from Abraham Lincoln. But I don't call it the Lincoln thing, right? And I don't hold up Lincoln because, by the way, Lincoln's son hated him so much, he chose to end the generation, right? The Lincoln died with his son because he hated his father so much because he was ignored as a kid and chose never to have offspring on purpose. Not a flawless leader. I'm sure glad Lincoln existed, though, by the way, and I'm sure glad he was what he was. Probably Mary Dodd probably wouldn't agree with our general view of Abraham Lincoln. But there's things we can learn from people. It's time to celebrate actions, the behaviors, instead of people. People are always going to disappoint us. They're flawed. Right? They're always going to get us in trouble. Somebody can have integrity for 55 straight years and lose it one morning. Okay. And by doing the wrong thing and engaging in the wrong action, I can't stop that. But what I can do is stop worshiping them. And I can start holding up their behaviors and say, here's something I can learn and apply for the rest of my life. And it doesn't matter it came from Abraham Lincoln or Steve Jobs or whoever it came from. Okay. As an example.
What are some books then that you might recommend that have good leadership behaviors in them. I do like this distinction. It's well said. There's actually a book I love. I have it up here called Lincoln's Virtues.
Yeah,
It's less about Lincoln and more about the idea of it. Basically, the premise of the book, as I recall it, is Lincoln was not a saint. Lincoln was a politician. So how did Lincoln get things done as a politician? That's something we can learn from him. So are there some books you commonly give to the leaders that you work with?
There aren't. I mean, it just depends on the context. There are things that I like at given moments of time.
Sure.
Like I'm a big fan right now. I've never met her. Katie Milkman wrote that book recently called How We Change. It's a great book, right? All around personal habits. I like it as good as I've liked just about anything else lately, right? And so if you show me and you say, of the last, like 6 months, what's something that I think is worth reading? There are things worth reading. I like Reed Hastings, the Netflix book, New Rules. I think it's got some really interesting stuff in it. I like his metaphor of talent density in there and some things. But there's no one particular book that I say to everybody, you need to read this. Okay. Now, if you told me it was only one thing, right, that I had to read, and so
sure,
there's an old book called Management of the Absurd that I just happen to be very fond of, and it's from 1996. It's hard to find now and so forth. But basically, what the author of the Management of Absurd does is he basically takes concepts like problems and dilemmas and says, what's the difference? And he does that, what's the difference between this and this? And he makes some really interesting points, and he kind of shakes you up, right? And he kind of gives you a different point of view really, really fast in a very, very thin book. I love that book. I used to give it to everybody. I don't give it to anybody now because I can't get it. But you can find it on ABE books and things like that. But and maybe they brought it back out since now that I'm saying this, I have no idea if it's been republished or not. But I am not a big fan of like this. You got to read this. I'm a big fan of reading programs. Give me a topic and I'll give you some seminal things that I think are not the everyday stuff to read. But there's just no one book. I'm a big fan of. There was a guy named Sample who wrote a book in 2002. He was the president of USC, called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. And you'll smile because it's contrarian. I'm contrarian, but he writes a chapter in there on thinking gray. I have lots of people read that. I love that chapter on thinking gray, because way too many leaders don't think gray enough. But there's not one thing, Ryan. If you told me like, what about this topic or that topic, then I'd give you books, but nothing that I give everybody.
Well, I do feel like that's what a great coach does. A great coach doesn't say, hey, read this general book. A coach says, on page 22 of this book published in 1940 is an insight that might unlock something for you about this very specific problem that you have.
Right. Exactly right. Yep.
So as we wrap up, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I think I mentioned it before, but when I came out and visited you, I have no conception of time anymore. It could have been 5 years ago. It could have been exactly 2 days before the pandemic started. But I remember I went for a run. This was like February in Pennsylvania. It was very cold. I went for a run and I ended up in Tredyffrin, Pennsylvania. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I came across this little Revolutionary War cemetery, and it just snowed. So everything was dusted in snow. And almost all the graves were old and decayed. You couldn't read them. And there was one, it dated to, I think, 1805. And this is the inscription. I thought I'd read it to you because to me, it's the epitaph that a leader should aspire to. It's verses on, this is for a woman named Margareta Werkheiser. And it says, verses on tombstones are but idly spent. The living character is the monument.
Cool.
And isn't that what we're aspiring to do as a leader? It's not to, leaders think about their legacy or they think about, generational wealth but really, if we go back to this idea of leaders make people better, the real monument you leave behind, as Jackie Robinson said, is the impact that we have on other people's lives, on our children, on our family, and on the people who decide to join us on whatever journey that we're on.
I mean, listen, I've interviewed lots of leaders at the end of their lives, and everybody says the same thing. It's all about who you matter to. And yes, that's the recipe for success, right? But if I would add to your commentary, which I think is a great one, to me, this whole idea of success and being a successful leader and legacy and everything else, it's so outcome oriented.
Right.
Where when I study the best leaders in the world, and something that I've learned to aspire to myself, and through them, it's, I didn't conceive of this, but this idea of, instead of trying to succeed, working really hard to deserve to succeed. Because when you deserve to succeed, trust me, it'll happen. The square will take care of itself. The victories will come. Whatever the success is will happen. But most of us don't work hard enough on us to deserve to succeed. Well, do you really deserve it? And that's all about you. It's all about your character. It's about your behaviors. It's about the choices you make. Do you deserve to succeed? And I think that's wholly what I believe in terms of that kind of a larger epitaph of what's life about. I think it's about trying to deserve success, not necessarily attain it.
There's a story I'm going to tell in the book that I'm writing now. Do you know who Admiral Rickover was? He basically invented the nuclear navy, one of the great unsung leaders of the 20th century.
Yeah, we've studied him.
Yeah, so he would we talked about culture as well. He would personally interview every person that was hired to work on a nuclear submarine. And he interviewed Jimmy Carter as a young man, right when Jimmy Carter had just come out of the Naval Academy. And he's interviewing Carter, and Carter's bragging about his grades and his performance and the assignments and all of that. And Rickover looks at him and he says, "But did you always do your best?" And Carter thinks about it and says, "No, I don't think I always did my best." And Rickover gets up and says, "Why not?" And then walks out of the room. And if we're thinking about the living monument, it's not whether we always succeeded, whether we won, whether we were a transformative president or seen as a mediocre president in Jimmy Carter's case. It's, did we do our best, right? Did we deserve success, as you were saying? That's what leadership is.
Absolutely. And so many great leaders have that view, and they say it in different ways, right? But the problem, Brian, is for you and me is we agree too much. Like these conversations aren't interesting enough to other people because we just have too much of the same ideas in our head.
Well, there's another funny story about Rickover. He once gave one of his subordinates a negative review, and the guy said, "Why? I thought I was doing great." And he said, "You haven't once disagreed with me the entire time that you've worked for me."
There you go. There you go.
No, Randall, it's always amazing to talk to you. You've been a wonderful mentor and guide to me, and I know I've spoken to many of your I'll call them proteges / advisees, and they absolutely rave about what you do. And I think about your thing about being a fan almost every day as a parent. So you've made me better as a result, and I'm a huge fan, and I'm so glad we got to meet. And thank you for doing this. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it.
My pleasure, and thank you. I wouldn't be in our relationship if I didn't learn from you, and so it's been reciprocal. Like I had a friend say to me once, I said, "Thank you for your friendship." He said, "All friendship is reciprocal. Thank you for yours," and it's true.
Likewise, I appreciate that so much, and I hope to come out and see you guys again in person sometime.
Okay, great.
Talk soon, Randall.
Are we? Okay, no questions.
I mean, we can. Do you have more time? I want to be respectful of your time.
Let me just look at my calendar. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
All right, let's do a couple. All right. So, what's your advice to a leader who's trying to transform or turn around a company, or that maybe the business was one thing and now it has to be a very different thing? How do you think about a leadership in turnaround or leadership in recovery, something like that?
So lots of, again, big broad question,
Sure.
Lots of moving pieces and the like. One of the first things that I think about is obviously, it has that leader spent or leadership team, have they spent the time to understand what people think, what works and what doesn't work? Nobody wants to buy a strategy and execute it until they think they've been heard. And so the so-called, and now it's very popular, but it used to be the so-called listening tour. And to go on that listening tour and really spend the time, people don't resist the transformation as much as people think they do. What they resist is and they don't need to always hear the arguments as to benefits or scaring me as to what won't happen. But what I'm a big believer of is if we can get them heard, we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to have a lot of ideas. And then in the process of that, we've got to create a strategy / vision that people can buy into. And then because it's a transformation, we can decide like, just because you've been here for a long time doesn't mean that you should be part of this. You may not connect to this strategy and vision. We didn't know we were going to create exactly this, but this is where it got created, and it was out of all our conversations. And so now, are you somebody that wants to be on the bus or off the bus? And are you even, should you even have a ticket on the bus? And so let's really ask everybody to re-up. And I don't mean re-interview for their jobs. So please let's not get draconian about, silly stuff. But the idea is let's make a conscious choice that I can be committed to where this is going and what the strategy and vision is and the higher purpose and the like. And now we can start working on implement the blueprint to do this. But let's decide that you're either all in, and let's publicly make you and me decide and say, I'm either all in or I'm not. And if I'm not all in, we're going to do our best to go find you something else to do. And that's where transformations generally, fall apart, is because they keep a lot of the people that don't have any intention of wanting to be there on the bus, and then they undermine everything.
So what about a leader who has to make some tough decisions to build on what you're talking about? I'm thinking about, the leaders now are having to decide, are we going to have a vaccine mandate? Or the leaders a year ago were sending everybody home, or a leader who has to make layoffs. What do you think about leadership and really hard decisions?
I think hard decisions are hard because of exactly the complexities that make them up. And complexities require a lot of thought and contemplation. What they also do is they require that you hear from lots of other people. And once again, I think it's about not sitting in a room by yourself and then deciding on things. You may or may not be able to achieve consensus. I would always try to work toward a loose consensus if I could, to try to see where we have common ground and where people agree, and then look at the arguments against and say, how reasonable are they? And at some point, what leaders do is they say, if I can't reach consensus, I'm going to have to go with what I think is serves both the organization and the teams and the clients and the people the best. And this is my choice, and that's why I'm given that authority. And so, tough decisions are tough decisions for exactly that reason. No right answers, and sometimes they blow up in our face, those decisions, and sometimes they don't.
We briefly touched on ego and managing up. Having written Ego is the Enemy, it's ironic. I get all the time people go, what do I do about my boss's ego? And I usually try to turn it around and go, why don't you focus on yours, right? That you're asking me about someone else's ego first. But what do you do? How does one get better at managing up or leading up when they're not the ones that get final say, right? You can put together the most brilliant plan, you can assemble the most brilliant team, but how do you deal with the difficulty of somebody else also leading you as you are leading others?
Well, you're going to have to learn how to carry feedback upwards. And sometimes it's about getting curious and asking questions. Like, why do you do what you do? Like, why is this your stance? Like, tell me, like, it doesn't occur to me. It's not my intuition to think in this particular way. You're the leader. You're somebody that has more experience than I do. Explain that to me. And what you'll oftentimes is just by asking the question, you will shake people up. You will get them to rethink their premises or start thinking about it. So, for example, you were using the example of yelling in the organization. That doesn't happen very much anymore, but occasionally it does. We'll see organizational cultures that are highly negative, where the only thing positive in them is drug tests and things. But nonetheless, right? If you had somebody that yelled all the time, say, hey, like, it's not my instinct to yell. So tell me, what do you think it achieves, and tell me why you do it. Maybe I'm going to double down. I don't know, but
sure.
Explain it to me. And then what you're going to wind up hearing is, I don't yell. Yeah, actually, I think you do. Right. Well, right. So you tell me it's not intentional. Well, what do you mean? I mean, I guess I raise my voice sometimes, and that's all it takes. I mean, that's a big deal. Asking questions in a curious way and carrying feedback, the most negative feedback with questions, is a very, very important way to leading up. Right. But here's the deal. My favorite ego, I don't think I've ever shared this with you. My favorite ego story is a Lyndon Johnson story. So Johnson's coming out of the White House. He's coming in. It's a true story because it's written by a Secret Service person who wrote this. And he's coming out of the White House, talking to reporters through the Rose Garden, and walking to a helicopter. There's two helicopters on two different pads. They had just met with some dignitaries, and they were going to take those dignitaries someplace else within one helicopter. And because he's talking to the press with his back to things, he's walking to the wrong helicopter. He's moving to the wrong helicopter. So the Secret Service guy taps him on the shoulder and says, President Johnson, you're moving to the wrong helicopter. That's not your helicopter. And Johnson gets a big smile on his face and puts his arm around him and says, son, They're all my helicopters, every damn one of them. Okay. This idea of ownership is the biggest problem that I face when we come to ego in organizations. Great leaders are stewards. They're stewards of their kids, they're stewards of their marriages, they're stewards of their teams, they're stewards of their organizations. We don't own anything. Okay. And the moment you have that in your mentality, it really is a problem. So here's my point. The reason I bring that up is not just tell you a fun story that I like. It's that when you ask me, how do I influence the person upward? Part of it is to say, right? Okay. We don't own this. We're stewards of this. So tell me, show me, and you don't have to say it this way. How are we maintaining this over time? What's the long strategy here? How are we retaining people through these actions? What's the stewardship here? And explain to me how it is you and I are acting like stewards. And again, don't say it directly that way. But when you ask that question, again, you will shake people up because you now remind them of what their true role is. And when you remind people that they're stewards instead of owners, they act out entirely differently. And
I love that. I was just thinking about that as a business decision on something that I own. Like, I was thinking about the profits that are coming in, the revenue that's coming in, and thinking about what is my obligation as not as the owner of the business, but as the steward of the business. What is my obligation to invest that? Is it advertising might grow it, but is that the best, most honorable use of the funds? Might it be better to do X, Y, and Z instead? And so I just wrote this down. Am I being a good steward? I think is a question leaders should ask themselves.
Absolutely. And you can ask that of your leader without doing it directly. You can say, how is this? Because almost all long-term, right, what's best for the business, anything that isn't about you in the center of it is moving towards stewardship, right? But it's the idea intentionally. My goal and my job is to actually shepherd, right, where this goes and to keep it alive and to maintain the highest effectiveness and efficiency and efficacy that we can. That's stewardship. When you start owning stuff, which people do so quickly, they own their kids, they own their marriage, they own their houses, they own everything. They're not stewards of things. And as a result, they operate very differently as leaders.
So last question, because it pertains to that. And I saw some people mention it, and I know it's come up. I've seen you talk to different leaders about it. There's that expression, and excuse the gendered nature of it, but it only works this way if you rhyme, because it rhymes. Happy wife, happy life, right? How do you think about leadership and their personal life, applying being a leader at home, applying having a balanced, happy home so that you're not bringing your garbage to the office and you're not bringing your garbage from the office home?
So there's three things in there that I'm going to unpack. So this is going to be a long answer, but I think
I love it.
Right. So the first thing is your job as a leader is to make really fast transitions. By that is you play many different roles in many different places. Your job is not to carry the last conversation. So forget about, how happy things are. Your job is not to carry the last conversation to this conversation. If you're going to be entirely attentive to me, it's about our conversation. So even during the workday, you just had a conversation. We just did this conversation.
Sure.
You can't let that influence what's going to happen next by mood, by focus, by lack of focus, or everything else. Your job is to make fast transitions.
Sure.
And so you got to, if that means you need to settle yourself and sit out in your car for a couple of minutes before you walk in the house so you can now be dad, then that's what you need to do. Sure. But your job is not to walk into that house and carry with you forward anything that came from before. And that's about conversation. It isn't about happy. It isn't about, disappointment. It's about conversation. And because all of those things reside in conversation. So your job is to make transitions, fast ones, from conversation to conversation, not carry them forward, right? So that's my first piece. My second answer, or kind of like, engagement around that idea of happy is, listen, this happens to me all the time. I'll study somebody and they'll say, I'm really good at relationships. I go, really? Tell me about that. And they go, I'm really good with my friends, have a great marriage, not so good with my colleagues, not good with my leader, okay with my clients. What I know is they suck everywhere. They just don't know. Okay. Because you can't be good really good in one spot. You've never met anyone that wakes up and, who's fast and then wakes up slow. You never met anyone that's like really smart. And then one day they're stupid, right? Excellence doesn't turn itself on or off. It just doesn't. And so the question really is when people tell me like, they need a certain context, that I have to be happy here to be happy here. My response is like, okay, it sounds to me like you're not happy anywhere. So let's figure it all out, because it isn't a segue between this and that.
Sure.
You're not achieving, you're not hitting on all cylinders every place. So let's figure that out, right? Because you're overestimating yourself, which we all do. Okay, that you're thinking it's more about X than it is Y. It's both of those things, right? They're happening. You can't turn excellence on and off, right? My third answer to that is this idea, of work-life balance has created such a horrible metaphor in 2021. Wasn't a horrible metaphor in 1960, by the way, but because we asked for different commitments, there was different engagement. It was an entirely different way of organizing ourselves and the like. But in 2021, there is no work-life balance. It's an integrated whole, right? It's work-life. Bezos calls it work-life harmony, and I don't like most of Bezos' stuff, but he's got that one right. It's a harmonious way of connecting all the dots, so that you integrate pieces. People that aren't talking to the people that matter the most to them in life. You're not talking to your kids all day long. In little nano texts or whatever else. And you're saying, well, I'm going to save that for the weekend. What I know is you're out of balance. Okay. Right. You haven't integrated in your life. Okay. And so I want all of those things integrated. And what you're going to find is when you integrate and create a harmonious balance in your life about everything you're doing. So everything that's important happens all the time. What you're going to find is everything happy has an influence in shaping of everything else. And everything that's unhappy, you have the ability to put in context and keep it. And so happiness will spread itself, if you will, if you're fully integrated. Satisfaction will spread itself. Pride will, all the good virtues will spread themselves. And the other things will become moments in time that you can get past. So to me, it's all about integrating and creating a whole, rather than separating things out. When we subordinate and separate things out, we get ourselves in trouble as leaders. When I say I'll worry about the relationship and how people see me later, I got to get the task done. I'm going to subordinate that to later. Later is one of the biggest dangers that we all face. Everything can be done later. I can procrastinate and do it later. I can talk about my relationships later. I can push this off for the weekend. We're going to have really quality time this weekend, Ryan, by the way. Okay. And what I'm doing is I'm basically not integrating the whole. And as a result, I'm being less effective as I should be as a leader. And I'm making everybody around me less effective as a result.
No, I love that. You said we didn't quite disagree, but maybe this is a minor point of disagreement. I would say that I have found that professional mastery, so work on your work, does not translate into personal happiness, but personal work, personal development can translate into professional excellence, so that it's not quite a two-way street. So the work you do on your relationship with your kids at your home, how your health, all those things can pay real dividends at the office.
Agreed.
You can work 50 hours a week, and that's not a lot. You can work all the time at the office and build a great workplace culture that doesn't immediately translate to home the same way that the
You're right. We disagree, because you used apples and oranges. You went from a place of saying, I've got, this family, and you use a couple of descriptors. I've lost them already. And then you went to say 50 hours, and right. What I want you to bring from that work is excitement and pride, right? And satisfaction of result, and those things, right? So when your kids ask you, why are you going? Why are you leaving every morning? Like, why are you going away? And you don't say, because I need to work, right? What you say is, I have this tremendous need to teach and engage other people, and I hope to share that with you. And I can't wait to do it. And then I can't wait to come back with you, because we're going to have this, right? There's so many things that you should, if you're doing it correctly, that you should be bringing back from work that should instill in your family and personal relationships in a way that betters them. We just don't think of them that way, because we don't compare apples and apples.
That's true. I guess I would just say there's lots of champions and billionaires and well-respected artists, etc., who are very good at what they do, but are shitty at home. Agreed. I would argue there's a lot fewer people who have wonderful, happy, actualized home lives who are not good at the office, or whatever their profession.
I agree with 100% with that. But here's what I'll tell you: of those musicians and artists and everybody else you described that are really good at what they do, but are shitty at home. I'm going to bet, right, that if I went in there and you and I went and looked at them, they're shitty with the other people that they work with too.
And they could be better at what they do.
It's all about, and it would make them better. It's all about relationships, but their talents are so significant that they're able to succeed despite themselves.
Yes.
And that happens all the time.
Yes. No, to me, that's the point about ego too. It's not that people with egos are never successful. It's that egotistical people could have been more successful if they could have gotten out of their own way.
Oh, 100%. Wow. We ended on agreement again.
We ended on an agreement. Randall, thank you so much. This was amazing. I appreciate it,
Always
everyone.
great talking with you. Good luck with all of this, and we'll talk soon.
We will. All right. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.